Thank you for inviting me to the beautiful city of Berlin. A funny thing to start with is I'm coming all over from the city of Rotterdam and to talk about resilience, but resilience is not even a Dutch word. We do not know the word resilience in our language, so I am already quite jealous about you guys, because resilience is a German word. Even in Italian, in Italy, it is resiliente, and in France it is résilience. But in our language, we need 4 different words to describe what resilience is about. I will come back on the definition later and how we try to apply the resilience thinking in our city. So I will elaborate a little bit about the strategy, about how we are implementing this and what our approach is, and also something about the network that we are a member of. I heard some of the speakers this morning say it's important also not to invent the wheel yourself, but to exchange things with other cities. Well, there is a network actually really focusing on resilience, so that might be interesting for also German cities as well. Starting my presentation about resilience in the city, I always start with the map because that's important for our DNA. We are a low-lying country. 80% of our city is below sea level. We are a delta city, so looking at the topography and the geography, you already see that working and dealing with water resilience, you could say, is already in our DNA. And from this topic, we developed the resilience concept to a broader perspective, not only climate. That's one of the main messages I would like to leave. Resilience is also about social resilience. Actually, we say the resilience of the city of Rotterdam starts with the resilience of the citizens. The citizens are the core of the city. Of course, it is also about the resilience of the hardcore, the infrastructure, etc. But the resilience of the citizens is key. So we are a low-lying city, a delta city. Water is coming from all directions, you could say, from the air, and the river, and the sea level is changing and groundwater level is changing. So doing nothing regarding water, that's not an option. It will always be on our agenda. At the same time, we keep on developing our city. We are densifying our city. We are already a concrete jungle, but we are adding 50,000 more houses the coming years. And in the whole western part of Holland, we need 1 million new houses. But where to build them and how to build them to become future-proof, etc. And on top of this, climate is changing. So we are facing a lot of, you could say, challenges at the same time. And climate change is already there. We are already facing small-scale flooding caused by excessive rainfall, small-scale flooding caused by a combination of huge river discharge and sea level, etc. Heat waves, drought, longer dry periods is actually relatively new for us. We were always used to work with too much water and to get rid of it, but now the combination with droughts is really complex. And even our infrastructure, the guy using the hose on the bridge, our infrastructure is not resilient to climate change, you could say, because it is expanding and bridges get stuck. So how resilient is the infrastructure in your city looking at climate change? And resilience, what I tried to explain already, it's not, the way we look at it, it's not only focusing on climate change. We are actually now facing a lot of multiple challenges. So we talked a lot about the digitalization this morning. I think there are a huge amount of opportunities to use the possibilities of digitalization to become more resilient. But there is also another side of the coin, and that is that we are also increasing new vulnerabilities because everything is becoming dependent on ICT, the Internet of Things, everything is automized. So we're also getting more vulnerable for example, cyber attacks. So cyber resilience is actually also now getting higher on our agenda, and I think well, this is a complex issue that we should include in the resilience thinking. It is complex because a lot of people do not feel the ownership of this, and that's part of the problem. The energy transition is there. How resilient is our energy infrastructure? Well, right today and yesterday we already faced that when you are dependent from one source and you have only one infrastructure, one pipe, and that's already part of the vulnerability. But for example, climate grids, energy grids are also hackable. So, and please understand me correctly, I'm not only here to face the problems and to sum up that we have a lot of challenges. Of course, there are also opportunities, but let's put it on the table. So, and the increase of inequity is also, well, happening in our country, in our cities, and that's something that we have to face. And we are just recovering from a pandemic. And at the moment that we wrote our resilience strategy, a month later, we were facing the Ukraine war. And so in general, what I would like to share with you is we can pick all those specific crises, and is that me? And we have to act, of course, related to those crises. That goes with stresses and shocks. But it's also, I think, a challenge to find out how, in general, we can be prepared for, you could say, the unknown crisis. That's the tough part. I hope this goes okay. So actually, you could say we are entering an era of change. A lot of uncertainties. I liked the speaker using this Volar of do you want me to use the mic? Okay.
Mic for the minute, please.
Okay. Is this better? Because we are in an era of uncertainty, complexity, etc., and how to deal with these uncertainties. That's complex, especially I think for the local authorities. I'm also working for a city, and it's always you see that we are behind the reality, and we are more or less reactive instead of proactive. So that's I think one of the biggest challenges. So. We defined resilience as the capability to deal with these shocks and stresses, and not only by surviving and adapting and thrive, so to learn from it, etc., but also to invest in prevention. So I think we could have a day talking about the definition, but I think the concept is relatively clear. And this simple graph shows when you explain that there is a city that is facing a shock or a stress, you have different phases, how to deal with this. So, of course, I think it's important to try to prevent something happening, but as soon as it's happened, you need capacities to respond, but also to recover. And then the crucial part of resilience comes also to learn from it and to get out of it stronger. Build back better is also a phrase that a lot of cities and resilience practitioners use. And an interesting tool that might be helpful is what we call the resilience lens. That's consisting of the 7 qualities. So you can imagine that we need for example, robust buildings, but also as soon as something happens, that you are somehow flexible to adjust these buildings in the future. So robustness and flexibility are important, but also design things in an inclusive way, take into account several challenges, so do it in an integrated way. So, and these qualities help when you apply them as a lens towards your work, your project, your program. Recently, we launched our second resilience strategy already. There are some differences between this one and the one we launched already, I think, 5 years ago. So, in the beginning, I had my task was to explain why resilience is important and what it is about. And now it's more about, okay, we accept and we understand
that the focus on resilience is important, but how do we apply this? And not only stick to the pilots and incident research, but scale it and try to, well, accelerate actually the resilience, how you call it, how we apply it, and to mainstream these things. Also include more in a structural basis the academic world. We were happy now that the universities themselves came up with a 10-year program on resilience and using the city as their biggest cases. So that's really a good timing. Just to show that the resilience strategy did not come completely out of the blue. This is just to show you that we, for 20 years already, are working on climate adaptation, climate resilience, you could say, and slowly we did this in a more integrated way. First, it was only water. Then we added, you could say, the spatial planning. Spatial planning is, you could say, the domain where most of the measures can be taken and applied. We included climate adaptation, and now we are working on the resilience in a broader perspective. So, seeing resilience as urban resilience as a capacity, as an important capacity of a city or an individual or a company, I think it's also necessary because it is a quite abstract word, and to try to find out what specific skills do you need to become more resilient. And that's what how we came with these 4 elements. It is important to find out how you can prevent things happen, shocks and stresses, or a crisis, or the disruptions of a transition. But how about your ability to recover? And then the important thing is, and it's not sexy, but it is important, are you able to learn from it, and are you able to adapt and to change what you did before? So what did we learn from the pandemic? Are we prepared for the next one? Because there will be another one. And that's hard. So we always say we have to reflect and to evaluate, and this is getting more and more important to become more resilient after something happens. And this slide shows a little bit, well, the core of the strategy, because you have to start somewhere. We identified the current important, you could say, crises or challenges for the city. And it's about, well, of course, climate change, but also the loss of biodiversity, as this has been mentioned by the previous speakers, but also a lack of resources. If we want to have a successful energy transition, we already need more natural resources than we have now. And this is also a part of the vulnerability. Increase of inequity and health, the increase in the chance of a pandemic will only increase, and cyber resilience. These are 6 topics, but again, what I try to explain, in general, you have to be prepared as much as possible for the unknown crisis. And the challenge is, I think, for us as cities, is also to develop and design measures that are not only the answer to one single challenge or crisis, but to more. So try to invest in multi-benefit solutions. I will come up with some examples after this. And of course, that counts for all of them. And it sounds complex, but hey, the world is complex at the moment, so let's embrace it. So some examples, so far the theory. As I told, for me it's relatively easy as an original water guy, and the fact that we are working for 20 years on climate adaptation, climate resilience, to come up with some examples out of that domain. So working on a climate resilient city is about investing in multifunctional solutions on different scales. From the big storm surge barrier all the way to the scale of a tile in your backyard garden. on all those scales, it is important to invest and to come up with solutions. So the track, I'm looking at the traffic light and getting really nervous about that. But the rowing track, for example, that's where we have some space. It's good for sports, health, also biodiversity, recreation, but it is also 4 million cubic meter of water storage. And especially in the center, we became famous for the water squares. It is a redesigned, you could say, public space. Instead of putting our money in bigger sewer pipes that is not flexible, not visible, and very expensive, we said, let's put our money in another designed public space so that the city can become more attractive. This is good for social resilience, the social cohesion people meet, but it is also allowed to overflow. And this is only happening maybe, well, nowadays, five days a year. But for the other 360 days, it is good for other benefits. And that's how we roll out this strategy for climate resilience in rain gardens and all kinds of water square type measures. And again, this also has been mentioned. We do have a lot of buildings with a flat roof. Nowadays, we were able to already develop 460,000 square meters of green roof. And then that's counting. Yeah? So that are all pieces of the puzzle. And this is even combined more and more with, for example, urban farming and education. Yeah? So again, the multifunctional solutions. But now we are facing the energy transition. We need also space for solar panels. The good thing is scientists showed and proved that solar panels are more efficient on a green roof. So you can use your flat roof for mitigation and adaptation at the same time. We need more spaces for houses. Tiny houses can be put on these roofs. So we have been calculating what the benefits of these roofs can be, and that is enormous, actually. Interesting maybe also for German cities is this one, because we also need to involve the citizens to become more climate resilient. 60% of the area of the city of Rotterdam, for example, is not public but private. If we want to become a climate resilient city, we need the private part as well. How to convince people to take out their tiles and de-pave their gardens. Oh, some smart guy came up with, or woman, I don't know, actually, came up with a contest. We challenged the other city somewhere in the north, Amsterdam, and to challenge them to get rid of as many tiles as possible. And of course, for the first year, Rotterdam won. And it was really successful because we organized tile taxis. So if you want to get rid of your tiles, then you can call a taxi and they will come up and collect your tiles. These will be recycled, of course. Now, a long story short, the ministry took over and it is now a national contest. I think 300 municipalities are joining this competition and millions of tiles have been removed. So maybe also an idea for Germany. But this was mainly, of course, about how to involve the citizens. That is really crucial. Well, looking ahead of what we have to put on our agenda, this is an example. This is, of course, not a photo, but a still out of a movie. We Dutch are used to keep out the water. We completely rely on our levees and dikes and sluices, etc. And actually do not have a real good plan when there is a flood. So a little bit of extra rainfall, that's something that we can deal with. But in this case, we do not know where to go and what to do. And especially, so that's important, talking about resilience for the people, but also how resilient is our infrastructure. This is not Rotterdam, but it was Manhattan. After Sandy, the water was gone, I think, after half a day. or even less. But for a week, they did not have electricity in that black area. So you could say, well, actually, Manhattan is not water resilient at all. They don't have a dike. But the infrastructure was also not resilient because it was not, and especially the vital parts of the infrastructure. So this was also for us a wake-up call. How resilient are the vital elements of your infrastructure? And why is this important? Getting more and more important because we are working on our, you could say, ICT solutions. We are all becoming smart cities. So depending on the same infrastructure. So that's, I think, here you see the link between climate resilience, cyber resilience, and, well, resilience in general. So cyber resilience is getting more important. We have thousands of pumping stations. I think that's the next slide. Thousands of pumping stations to keep our city dry. These, in potential, are hackable. And this is only one vital part of our infrastructure. So that's, I think, a new lens to look at your city and to include the resilience thinking, so to speak. Going to the energy transition, we try to create an energy resilience framework because we think we are going to redesign our energy system. And for a certain district, we will have a certain decision to develop maybe an all-electric district, and other districts in a different way. So there will be a whole patchwork of new systems. How resilient is this? Maybe it is resilient because they are not dependent, so to look with this lens to your new energy system, I think is also crucial. How resilient is your new system, and how can you develop the decisions in a way that each decision is making the resilience of your whole city get that on a higher level. So all complex themes, but they all come together in the city. And we found out that the district level is an interesting scale to work with these different challenges at the same time, to do it in a real integrated way. And there is also the distance between the citizens is doable, I think a good scale to really involve and to include the citizens in the process. In this district, actually our 2 districts belong to the top 5 poorest districts in Holland. And we said, let's not knock on the door and say you have a climate problem. No, their social position, the social challenges are actually what bothers most of the people. So let's put that in the center and as an entry point. And let's find out how we can use the energy transition and use climate adaptation, all things that we have to do, as a leverage to increase the social resilience. And so to do it in an integrated way, but put the people in the center. And the manager of this resilient BOTU project now dared to also put her budget on the table of the citizens. So in this case, you could say we do have a budget, a citizens' budget, which is, I think, a very interesting step. Also an experiment, but an interesting step. Even on the building level, you can look at resilience. So how the housing corporation wanted to do a traditional makeover, a reconstruction, a new paint, a new material, etc. We challenged the housing corporation to work together with the city and the citizens of this and the residents in this building to find out how to do this in an inclusive way. People were also involved in the process, were educated as painter, for example, so it has a social benefit. We included their whole rooftop. Now it's one of the nicest natural rooftops in the city, and we included the public space. So again, do it in an integrated way. Even during the pandemic, I have to give the compliments to the politicians in my city, because they dared to identify 7 big city projects to accelerate investing and to increase jobs, instead of waiting and only reacting and focusing on crisis management. But they dared to put this on the table, and this will be what we call the Rotterdam High Line. It's an old railway track. It will become a 2-kilometer long park. Again, citizens are involved, and we are creating more jobs and more green space, so it's also good for the climate resilience. And this is another example, the second example of the 7 big cities. There's an old port area, and it will be redesigned. There will be some new development, taking into account the sea level rise, and include floating parks, etc. So, are we doing this alone? And I already started my presentation. No. Actually, the way we are working on resilience, and the fact that I can be the resilience officer, that's all because we became member of the Resilient Cities Network. And this started by the Rockefeller Foundation already 8 years ago now, and called the 100 Resilient Cities Network. That has been transformed into the Resilient Cities Network. It's more city-driven now, and the Rockefeller Foundation still is one of the sponsors, but we are having now more sponsors. So you could say the network is more resilient. But having said that, I think it's good to show that we can really learn from each other. For some reason, no German cities are member of this network. And I will challenge you, invite you, that maybe sounds nicer, to invite you and to find out whether it's interesting for your city. And of course, you can contact me or go to the website. And the way they help is, so we do have nearly 100 cities, but now the network is open to expansion, and welcoming more cities. And they empower the cities by helping them to appoint a chief resilience officer. That's one of the requirements, but also to develop this holistic resilience strategy, touching upon the most important shocks and stresses that specific city is facing. And so you could say there is a general approach, but always it is tailor-made to your specific city. And there are ways that they can help to implement things, and even maybe more important, also to help mobilize funding to help and support that implementation. Now there is just to show that it is really the people doing it from the cities. I'm also in the global steering committee, and we do have a board. I was able to get my mayor in the board of the network, so that's always helpful, of course. So, yeah, and I think it's also good to mention that even that when there are politicians not believing in the resilience concept or climate change or whatever, it is also good for your local economy, yeah? Because it is creating jobs. It is creating added value, you could say. We are organizing conferences. We became the hosting city of the Global Center on Adaptation, and one of the offices of the city Resilient City Network is now also hosted by the city. And these people are living and working in the city. So it is also business, and that's I think a nice spin-off. So wrapping up, I haven't even seen the orange light, so maybe there is some space for some questions. Looking backwards, I think somehow this was not really planned, but in an organic way, we were able to develop a whole ecosystem on the resilience concept with, you could say, climate resilience as a strong basis. And we build it out from there. But we're able to connect with the knowledge institutes to develop knowledge and to do research, to translate that into strategies. But to implement these strategies, you need innovations and you need visible pilots. I always say as an advice when people ask me, well, how to start and what to do, try to parallel develop an overall long-term resilience strategy, but at the same time start immediately with no regret measures. Some cities know that they have a lack of water storage, so that's you do not need a strategy to start with that. So, and visible projects like the Water Square inspired a lot of people in that district and also entrepreneurs. So visible projects in the city that are always helpful. And then finally, the last part of that circle, you could say, is that we are exchanging this with a lot of other cities and again organizing conferences, etc. And that is creating new knowledge questions picked up by the research institute. So this kind of ecosystem is, I think, important. Also, to become, and that sounds maybe strange to say that in this room, but to become a little bit less dependent from the politicians. We need continuity to work on resilience. And well, the politicians are elected every 4 years, and then resilience is part of the negotiation. I think when there are a lot of stakeholders, citizens working on resilience, it will be an ongoing process, and that is what we need. Thank you.